What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Jules Gilleland, and we speak about thinking with things. So stay tuned. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, lean back to be playfully inspired. Hello, Jules. Welcome to the show.
Hello. I'm very excited to be here.
Me too. And I'm excited to learn more about how to think with things.
Yes. Yeah.
And bringing toys and creativity into the workshop space.
Yeah, it's exciting. And I can't wait to share it with you.
Yes. And I always start with the same question, kind of a warm up. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
No, I don't. I sort of am not against it, but I kind of fight it. I fell into being a trainer, a facilitator, but I still really see myself as a designer. And so even when I'm doing a workshop, I feel like I've designed that workshop. And during the workshop, I'm also looking at ways to redesign it for the next time. So, and I used to not really tell my clients that. I used to say, okay, I'm a trainer and da-da-da. But now actually I'm really pretty open and I say I'm a designer, and the trainer sort of happened. So,
thank you for sharing that. And you're in good company. So I think the majority of my podcast guests answer the question with no, actually, I don't put the label facilitator on my forehead. And I'm just intrigued by all the different answers. And what I find interesting is when I hear designer, I think of all the work that comes before you step into the space.
Absolutely. And I think that for me is the most exciting part. Not only the before, but also the after, like trying to do it better the next time, seeing different things that I've done and saying, okay, that felt a little awkward. How could I design it in a way that makes it less awkward next time? So I think when I'm actually in the day, I am kind of just winging it, I'll say, because I've sort of designed it beforehand, not even planned it so much, but reading the room and adding new material or taking material away and reading what people need during the day. So
sounds more like an improvisation game theater.
Yes,
together with the participants.
Well, I mean, for 20 years, I guess, I worked with children and teachers. And definitely with children, this is how you work. You cannot plan how they're going to engage with something or work with it or what the outcomes will even be. So I think that's the same way that now I've come to adult learning and adult workshops as well.
And it's beautiful to hear this process of reflecting afterwards to see what can be done differently next time. It sounds as if it's an always work in progress. So your sessions are never done, maybe?
And they're never the same. I think also a lot of that has to come from imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of people have, in that literally no matter how many trainings I've done, and I've done a lot now, I feel like, okay, this is the one where they're going to figure out that I don't know what I'm doing. So like sometimes when things don't work so well, like for instance, actually, I've always hated the closing of a workshop. I never really can figure out how to get it to close perfectly, like the reflection and everybody feeling positive, and sometimes it seems like it ends abruptly because you ran out of time, or you ask if anyone has anything to share and it's just crickets. You hear nothing and you're like, oh, right, we still have 20 minutes left. So the latest thing that I've designed is an activity with the things, which takes me out of the picture. Actually, the things close it for me. And so a lot of times I do that kind of thing so that I can step away from talking too much during a training.
Which now brings us immediately into the into the core. What are things?
Yes.
What are the things about?
What are the things? Well, literally, actually, I always say this. If you were to look underneath your sofa, especially if you have children, or in your sofa cushions, or in your junk drawer, or in your sort of, that place in your office where you just throw everything because you don't know where it goes, those are things. They're found objects. They're bottle tops and marbles and paper clips and bits of puzzles and bits of Lego and acorns and all kinds of things, actually. Everything is about hand size or smaller. Nothing is very big. And if you put it all into a big pile, it would just look like you should throw it in the bin. But I sort it out and then it looks very beautiful and it takes it out of its context. It's no longer a nut. Now it's in a group of brown things, that can be used for solving a problem or representing people in a team or different things like that.
Which brings to my mind two concepts. One is MacGyver. So you can use these things to solve a problem.
Yes.
And the other one is constellations. You can use these things to represent something.
Absolutely. Yeah. Metaphors. So that's really what they are, actually. Because we've taken them now out of their context, they can be anything. And we do have people and little figurines and animals, but a lot of times actually the button becomes the director, or an acorn can become the stakeholder. It doesn't necessarily mean that they use figurative objects in their thinking.
And you mentioned that you first started to work with kids, and now it doesn't sound like kids. Unless it's the kindergarten director.
Yeah. No, it's definitely still playful, and it's not very far from what I did with, or still do with, children. Actually, it's pretty much the same thing. The problems are different, of course. The challenges are different, but the playful way that they engage in it and the way that I represent the materials in front of them is all the same.
Could you walk us through what would be the problem? Why would someone call you? And then you come with your box of things.
So the one that we did, or that I did the most actually before COVID, was what we call the challenge and solution. So a team would say, okay, we have a certain variety of challenges, right? It's not just one. We have large turnover. We have a very new team. We have a very high stress job, and nobody really has gotten a chance to get to know each other. We have a lack of motivation. We have real issues in our communication, all kinds of things like that. And so I work with them, and then I create sort of a good question is what I call it, actually, but it's more like a prompt. And so then on the day of the workshop, hopefully I arrive early, but many times participants also arrive early, so they get to see me set up. And I have a little trolley full of my objects, which are pre-sorted, and a bunch of actually old food boxes, plastic boxes. And I lay them all out in a line, and we do a few icebreakers to get everybody in the mood. And then on each table is laid the challenge, say, build the barrier to your communication in your team. And then say a group of 4 people. 4 is lovely. I love that number in a small group session. They talk about it a little bit, and then they go up to the table. They look through the objects and they start to build it. And because they're building the challenge visually, they can all see it. Whereas it's not just words anymore. It's, that's the barrier. And it's right in front of where we need the communication to be flowing. So how do we get that barrier to go away?
And I was surprised, and actually it's brilliant to start with building the challenge so that you are on the same page of what we are talking about. Because I think what often becomes a problem is that everyone believes that we are clear and understand what the challenge is. We need to have better communication. And then everyone starts working on the solution.
Yes. And I force them not to think about the solution. It's not, it's not now. And actually what happens is I organize it so that they build their challenge, they present it to everyone in the room. It might be that people are working on different challenges, but even if they all have build the barrier to your communication, none of them create the same thing. It's really crazy, even if they're all on the same team. And then we go to lunch and we come back and I mix it up, and then a different group of 4 people have to solve it. So in another way, then they're not too close to it because they didn't build that one.
Because you cannot, was it Einstein who said we cannot solve problems with the same mindset that we produce them?
Yeah, exactly.
It's basically that. So you have to solve with the same mindset, you can solve another problem, another barrier.
Yeah, absolutely. And it gets very, I mean, it all sounds serious now, but it's not at all, because we have, you're playing with toys and objects. So, I mean, the giraffe is the only one who can see over the barrier, and it's very playful. And another thing that's really great about it is, well, children don't have this issue, but people, adults do, is we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, right? We don't want to, our boss is in the room, right? So you're not going to say he's the problem right there, point at him. But for instance, if you make the boss, the marble who never sits still and is all over the place and going super crazy and never goes in one direction, you're talking about him and he knows you're talking about him, but he doesn't feel triggered by it at all, which is a really nice sort of side effect of the objects.
Yeah, so you can talk about it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And so it reminds me a little bit of the idea of Lego serious play, where you think with your hands and now you think with things. What is the difference, and where does the magic come in from the things? I do have some sort of an idea. I'm curious to hear from you.
So I was introduced to Lego serious play right at the beginning of it, actually, because I was in an accelerator, and it was in London. I remember when it happened, and we were both presenting at a conference, and I thought, bad word in there, but anyway, Lego is doing what we're doing, what we're trying to do, and now we can't compete with Lego. I mean, and I do say. In some instances, do you know Lego serious play, when I'm trying to explain what I'm doing? Because there is a lot of correlation there. I mean, it is, in a way, serious play. It is somewhat playing with your hands, although I don't think that that's what we're doing at all. We're more visual thinking. Because even though I say we build your challenge, they're not actually building it. I mean, they're representing it really, actually, in a visual way. They're making their thinking visible. We have Lego also in what we use, and there's definitely a real play aspect to it. But one exciting thing that happens with the things is that if you were a child and you played with Lego, then as an adult, if you pick up Lego again, it's going to trigger a part of your brain, your childhood self, sort of, and open up your ways of communicating and thinking. And that's called actually embodied cognition. But if you didn't play with Lego, then when you were holding Lego, it's not really connecting.
Doesn't say anything.
No, but if you grab a button, or if you grab an acorn and you walked in the woods with your grandmother, or you have little animals, or I even had a guy have a real reflection when he picked up a ping pong ball of playing with his sister. So I think that is the beauty, and the things is also this idea that it sort of transmits you back to that childhood self, who was not afraid to communicate and not afraid of failing and not afraid of just giving it a go.
Interesting. What I hear is it's almost a process of democratization, where you give a larger group of people, of participants, the opportunity to connect to any of those objects in their very own personal way and to create a story around it.
Whereas Lego, you only connect to the idea of using Lego, but a brick is a brick. And then you have to do something with it. So the Things is also a vehicle of team communication, because you can, if you pick up then the button or the ping pong ball, you will share your association why you picked that object. So it's a beautiful storytelling exercise, I think,
absolutely. And that's
for team members.
Yes, absolutely. And that's what my first icebreaker that I do is everyone goes up to the objects and takes one thing that represents them. Or sometimes I say your superpower, your talent. And then that already is quite an eye-opening experience, because when they go around the room and tell their thing, their idea, or the one thing about themselves, it's shocking to everyone, including the person, because sometimes they say things that they're like, oh, I haven't thought about that in 30 years, And so that's very exciting. And it's the same question that is, the massive training icebreaker question. Tell us one thing about yourself that nobody knows,
I hate this question.
Exactly. But actually, in this case, it comes up with crazy questions and answers, actually.
And I think because you facilitate it. So what I dislike about the question, tell me one fun fact about you. Well, I'm not a fun person, and I'm speaking so much on the podcast that there is no such thing that nobody knows about me. And I find it so intimidating or stressful, this question. It puts a lot of pressure on me. But if you say, okay, choose from a set of things, you're basically providing a container that facilitates to pick something, because one idea will come up when you pick up any of those objects.
Yes, and they have to touch them. That's what I say also. Like, just sort of, if you can't find one thing or you can't think of something, just sort of rummage through the boxes with your hands, because already touching them, inspires some ideas. And exactly, like, I also hate when you're sitting around a room and everybody's staring at you and they ask you a question. You're like, like right now I have to answer it. Whereas this, in the way that we're doing it, they sort of have, 5-10 minutes to peruse the material and think about what they're going to say.
And the beauty in the mundane, I think it's because we all connect to it, and it's not necessarily related to childhood. I don't remember who it was. Someone who was on the show said that the problem with childhood memories is always connecting to our playful past, is that if you had a happy childhood, it's easy to connect to that and to bring this back into the room. But if we have participants who didn't have a happy childhood, maybe it was traumatic, then there's nothing they can connect to. And this brings an energy into the space that is very loaded.
It is, actually. And I have had moments like that where I thought, okay, maybe I should actually understand more about therapy when I have this moment. But I have to say that the few that I've had where I've had tears when they have this memory, but somehow it is loaded. I agree with you. But I've never really had it be negative. Somehow it just opens everybody up to more. This is a safe space to say what we want. And, he said that and he cried, and, we've never even seen him have an emotion, and so now we're connected to him a little bit differently, or her. So I do agree. But now, actually, since COVID, a lot of what I'm doing, because teams haven't ever met physically, people don't know each other. So the icebreaker that I'm doing now really is your superpower.
Mm-hmm.
What is your superpower? What is one talent that you have that you haven't yet been able to show in your work because you've just been thrown into it, and so you want everybody to know that actually I'm also good at this, and not like I can touch my nose with my tongue, but something that's work related, so definitely something like that.
Yeah. And how do you choose the things Well, two questions. How do you choose the things? And I assume that you have at some point experimented with participants bringing things.
Yes.
So how did that go? And are you bringing them now?
I still have participants bring things, actually. So I'll tell you about that in a minute. But if you ask my children, I have 3 boys, and my friends, nothing is off the table. Everything is possible, unless it's edible or dirty or dangerous. Paper, I've gone off paper just because it doesn't come out of the workshop the same way it went in. They've ripped it up or something like that. So I'm also kind of not doing paper anymore. But yeah, I find things everywhere. I have 3 boys, so I get them from there, from my friends. I even once, just outside my house, somebody put 4 bags of toys outside their house, and I, with my son, picked them up and brought them inside and cleaned them all up. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I have the things. I used to have a huge amount, and now I've, kind of defined it into my trolley so that it's easy to take back and forth. And then when I have a group.
Quick question before you get to the group. You're not buying the new, so it's always used things Absolutely. That had a life beforehand.
Yes. Nothing is new. Nothing is new.
Maybe you tell us later why this is.
Yeah. Okay. I will. Do you want me to tell you now or go into the whole having groups bring things?
Yes. So tell me now, and then you explain why the group.
Okay. So yeah, the whole found object thing it goes back quite a ways, actually, to when I was designing spaces and working with teachers and children. I was studying a Italian education system called Reggio Emilia, and in Reggio Emilia, which is actually the region of Italy as well, they have an amazing school system, and they are using found and natural and all kinds of objects. I mean, new as well, actually, but they're really into using found objects. And so I went there when I was doing my thesis from Finland before 2000, and I fell in love with the whole system. And they had a center called the Remeda Center. And the Remeda Center took things from industry, so scrap material from industry. And they had a beautiful shop of this bits of plastic and automobile parts and everything. And teachers could come in and collect it for their classrooms. And so then their classrooms were just filled with these scraps. And kids were building with them and doing math and language and arts and all kinds of things. And they call them loose parts. So the idea is that you've given it another life. And you don't glue it to anything. You reuse it over and over again. So one day it's, an animal on a farm, and the next day it becomes part of a sculpture that's all built together, but not glued. And so that's where I fell in love with the idea of reuse and found objects. And also because going into teachers' classrooms, I was designing a lot of classrooms at the time. And they were like, we don't have a budget. We can't buy material. And I look around their room and their closets are stuffed full. And I'm like, you have so much material here, just pull it out, and start using it in a different way. Instead of it being one, a stack of puzzles. If you're not using those puzzles, take all the bits out and put them in a big basket and put it in the building area, the construction area, and see what kids do with it, So that's kind of where how it happened, the found objects. And now they're really tiny with Think With Things. But when I was designing playgrounds and classrooms, we did really big loose parts on the playground, especially.
Beautiful. And then basically the children would just grab things and build their own playgrounds with what they found.
Yes, exactly. I mean, just like the adults, they go up to the material and they decide what they want it to be today,
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And then you ask your participants sometimes or all the time to bring their things?
Not all the time. I mean, it really depends on the group. Smaller groups, actually, I don't. Definitely when I have a group of 80 or like 150 or 200, then it's nicer to have them bring some objects because then we have a bigger variety and I don't, my trolley is not that big. And I find several things are good about that. One is it gets them into a sort of a playful mindset before they arrive because they have to find these things. Not everyone is as great at bringing them as others. So I do find that the children are great at bringing objects, by the way, but adults sometimes, I get lipstick and makeup and wax candles and toilet paper tubes. I'm like, okay, I get it, but so I do have now a sort of an ongoing list of this is the things not to bring. So that's fun. And then it's just also that so they don't take them back, they leave them. Mm-hmm. So that's how I'm also collecting more and more things. And I would have to say that it's getting better, but about half are useful. Sort of the rest are going in the recycling. What makes them useful? Well, I think one is if they can be reused. I would have to say that's actually my main thing because I don't want to put my own bias or objective on it because somebody else might see something in that object that I don't. So if it's reusable, if it's a bottle top that's clean or a little piece of a toy, then definitely I keep it. I don't keep, like I said, I don't keep any paper anymore. I used to, and definitely don't keep makeup, wax candles. Also, kids tend to like to scrape the wax out and makes a big mess. So yeah, anything that's not messy. I once had a group of 200, it was teachers actually, she brought blueberries and she put them, so they come and they sort them out, right? They put them in the boxes. So she bought a bunch of real blueberries and she put them in a blue box and I didn't notice, put them in my trolley and a month later, I have rotten blueberries. So yeah, nothing edible either. Yeah. I love the contrast that I'm hearing of you working with children and working with adults and professionals. So working on their communication strategies and working on designing a playground. And I hear you designing classrooms. And I wonder what it means for designing workshop spaces or offices. Yes. So what can adults, professionals learn? What have you learned about the professional, air quotes, life from your work with children and maybe even vice versa? Well, definitely the whole engagement aspect. Because when I first started working with children to design a playground, actually when Think With Things sort of began, was I took in a bunch of white paper and rulers and all the architecture stuff, to a group of children. And I said, okay, we're going to design our dream playground. And about 3/4 of them started drawing, some, really enthusiastically, others little tiny little things, a few of them not at all. And so the next time I went back, I took a big box of objects, found objects. And I said, okay, now we're going to build our dream playground. And actually before I even finished the sentence, they had already dove into the materials and were pulling them out and playing with them and setting them up. And the same exact thing happens with adults. I find that they quickly get into the workshop way faster than if we started with, paper and pencil and sticky notes and flip charts and all of that. So that's one thing that I definitely learned from the children that I bring in. Have I learned from adults that I bring into the children? Can I say no? You may. I would have been surprised, I must say. But I thought I'd ask anyway. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's easier. Well, it's easier and harder with children, I would have to say. I would have to say that actually I have to have my, what do you say, your chickens in a row, or I have to have my planning and my wording down better with children, because they'll find you out, if you don't know what you're talking about. So I can wing it more, I think, in an adult workshop than I can with the children. So maybe that's one thing that I've learned between the two. I have to say that I do it But a lot of people ask me, like, aren't your workshops really different for adults than they are with children? They're not that different. Especially in the beginning, I used to actually have the same prompt. I had these ones called Think Like a Cards, and they were think like a tree, think like a turtle, think like a butterfly. And they create sort of a theater with the objects and and a story. It's kind of a storytelling activity. And I do that a lot with adults as well. I haven't done it post-COVID very much because we have other issues. But I would say I do the same with adults and children. The real difference is that the children's plays and stories are much more detailed and vivid and out of the box and innovative, So, and maybe that's not what I should say to adults when I'm actually doing the team building, because they're like, a 4-year-old
performs better than you.
Has a better result. But anyway, no.
And when you say better results, how would you measure that? Because I could also imagine that a more complex, vivid, too much out of the box story is more difficult to bring home and to turn into something concrete. Because at the end of the day, I guess you're not there to write a children's book.
Yes.
Or a screenplay.
Well, I think when we do the Think Like a cards, that is really just about opening up and being theatrical and coming out of your box. I mean, they present it, and that is our end. It's very important. That's one thing I will say actually in all of this is it's very important for adults and children to present their thinking, not just to think all day and then, we're done, but to actually have a chance to act it out or tell it or present it in a way. It's a really important end. And I think a lot of times that is the concrete ending. If, for instance, in an adult workshop, if the takeaways, if the objectives aren't just to have a fun day together, then we have, we flow in a different way, and we don't do that one. We'll do more the challenge solution activity or something else, definitely.
But they're more in the doing and then debrief.
Yes, exactly. An action plan. Yeah. At the end, who's going to take this on? What are the first steps, kind of thing. Then it gets a little bit more serious towards the end.
I guess then some stickies will still come in.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't. I'm anti-sticky notes. I do use flip charts, but I use the piece of paper as the platform for our building on the table. But I really don't like sticky notes. I don't have them in my toolbox at all.
Why is that?
Well, I don't know. I guess it's just because we're not thinking in that way. We're using objects. I want them to try to use the objects as much as possible. If you're going to make an idea cluster, make it out of objects on the table kind of thing and move them around. One thing I do have to say also that's difference between children and adults is, and the reason why I put the paper on the table now is we need to label as adults. We need to say this is what this is, because it's not clear enough for everyone to understand that that's who that is, So they label on the table and on the piece of paper. And I've never really had the need for sticky notes. I never thought, wow, I wish I would have brought a bunch of yellow and green and blue sticky notes.
So if I understand correctly, then you would bring the ping pong ball that would represent something and place it on the map or in the cluster.
Yes.
And because of the earlier conversations around this ping pong ball, the group will remember what it represents.
Absolutely. They can label it there. Like, for instance, if they're going to do the one where they switch tables, so there's going to be another group coming to your table and solving your challenge. Mm-hmm. It's very important that they clearly represent it. And then therefore they use words and things like that. But we do have them presented as well to the group. So I guess, it could be like using sticky notes, but they're just writing beside the object on on the table.
It might also be liberating to just think in a different way, because I think 99% of the population, when they hear workshops, they think sticky notes.
Exactly.
And then not to have that and to work around that. I actually, maybe 100 episodes ago, I recorded a conversation about how to facilitate without sticky notes.
Without sticky notes.
So it was worth an entire 90 minutes conversation.
Yes, yeah.
So it is a thing.
I'll have to go back and listen to it, actually. But I haven't really ever really seen the need for them.
Good.
A lot of times I actually even give paper and pencil little tablets for those who think while writing, because we're not all, in fact, actually, think with things is kind of coming back to all the ways that we learned as children, So there is the logical thinker, there is the one who needed to build with their hands, to think, and the ones who write. And so I do provide those possibilities, but I'd have to say that very few people write a lot anyway during a session.
Beautiful.
That's good.
What makes a workshop fail, in your opinion?
So fail for my client or fail for me, actually? So this is a question. I'm not sure I've ever had one fail for a client, actually, happily. They always seem to work out, even though, again, in the beginning, people are looking at the toys and looking at me and their watch, really? We're doing this all day long? And then I get really, But by the end, the same people are on the floor and I can't get them to stop playing. But what makes it fail? I would say that, like I mentioned in the beginning, the not closing it well. I feel, not that I've ever had any negative feedback about that, but to me, it doesn't feel like it went well. And a lot of this is from our natural, humane, what would we even call it? So you have a great holiday, let's say, and the whole entire holiday was wonderful, except for the plane trip home was horrendous. And for some reason now this holiday has a bad taste in your mouth because of it didn't end well. So that stresses me out, is when I've run out of time and I don't have a good end to a workshop. And that's why I've designed something so that I'll never have that again. I think what makes it fail for me as a designer, not a facilitator, is if I didn't get anything out of it. Nothing new came to my mind. There's nothing I need to. It just sort of was meh. I don't know if you've ever had a workshop like that, but it's okay, I did it. Now I'm going to go home and get something to eat and go to bed. If I'm not super inspired and energized and oh my gosh, I really want to redo this or do that next time, or I can't wait to get home and go through the images and send them to them, or, things like that. That for me, I think, is a failed workshop on my part. If I come away with, not really a lot from it. Beautiful.
And what I hear is the lot is a creative inspiration. It's something tangible or input for the next workshop and the next iteration.
Yeah, I think so. I think I say I'm a designer, but I'm actually, I think, just a very holistic problem solver. I really love, and I'm extrinsically motivated also, actually. So I can't see my own problem and fix it. I don't, for some reason, I can't do that. But I
think very few of us are able to do that, if we're very honest.
But if I see a problem, or I see that, the engagement didn't go exactly smoothly, or there could be some tool or something that makes this work better, that's really exciting to me. And then I'm okay, I could solve that. I could design something that makes that work better. And you had said something about designing classrooms and playgrounds and what might that look like as an office. I dream of designing an office. I have plans and books about designing meeting spaces and offices. And I would love to think that my participants go back to their meeting rooms and add things to their boring boardroom. I don't think they have, maybe. But yeah, that is I think if I have a big sort of aspiration, a big dream, it would be to completely rethink how a meeting is conducted.
Designed.
Yes,
physically.
exactly. Yes.
What would be the main ingredient? A part of the things, obviously.
Space. I mean, this space. So there's a great, I had mentioned Reggio Emilia, this education philosophy, and they have an amazing sort of theory or way of working, which is called the environment as the third teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So they design the environment to teach as well. And a lot of what they say is if children if they're misbehaving or they're not engaging or they're not really involved in what you're teaching, it's because your environment isn't working for them. And I've always been a freelancer. I've never actually worked in an office, which that was really hard when I started doing training. But I go into those rooms, all white walls, all a white table, black chairs, and I'm thinking, there's absolutely nothing in here that makes me feel creative or innovative or like sharing or communicating at all. So I think the main ingredient is the space, is making the space work for you, and and not filling it with Sharpie markers and sticky notes. That's Yeah,
this does make the space more approachable. It reminds me of two things. One is a book that I read that got me to paint all my walls in my apartment all in different colors. Okay. And I don't remember the name of the book, but basically what she said was, there's research that shows that there are material things that make us happy. And one of those is color. So if we know that color makes us happy, why would we sit in white rooms?
Yes.
Oh, this makes sense. So I have my kitchen in bright orange and then a living room in blue.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Okay, why don't we actually paint offices in color? And the other thing that comes to my mind, and this could actually be an interesting experiment because it relates also to the things. And I discussed this with a previous podcast guest. If the participants come in and there's no arrangement, there are no chairs in a specific order, no tables, and you allow them to just create the space in which they want them to have the workshop, how would that look like?
Yes.
And what are they coming up with?
That would be super exciting, actually. I did this one workshop. It was like 200 people. It was before COVID. And I was responsible for sort of the games in between the sessions. So they were all breaking up and going into sessions. And I did something called floor play. It sounds really, really raunchy, actually, if you say it wrong. But it was where we were in this corridor and they asked if I wanted tables and chairs, and I didn't. So it was just a carpeted corridor. And they had to get on the floor and make these runways, out of kind of ramps and balls and play this game on the floor, which again makes people a bit uncomfortable in the beginning. And definitely if you can't get on the floor physically, then you can bring a chair over. I mean, I'm not going to force you down if you can't. But yeah, it was funny. And then, the ones who were the biggest sort of, what are we doing? When it was time to go to lunch, I was like, okay, now it's time to clean up and continue. And they were like, whoa, wait. The ball is almost, going in. And so it's quite funny. It's quite funny like that. And I think, okay, it doesn't work in every situation, but definitely, and this is a way that I work on designing classrooms as well, is that, children don't want to come in and all sit at a tiny adult chair, at a tiny adult table to learn. They might want to go over in a corner and sit on a beanbag or somewhere else. So
in the office is the same.
Absolutely. We're the same. We are the same as we were. So, yeah.
Wonderful. And it also, if we have more flexibility, it also sparks different conversations, right? Mm. And I think that's one big difference between the online and the offline workshops is how many people and whom do you meet when you stand up and walk to the coffee machine or the fridge or the loo? these serendipitous moments that you cannot design for.
Yes. This is I don't know if you've read the Steve Jobs book.
No.
He says this in his book, and I worked with Beaux-Arts here, a museum here, and we took some of his ideas. And so when he redesigned Apple,
mm-hmm.
he made one sort of coffee area so that the management had to come down to coffee and the workers had to come up for coffee. They all had to come. And what he said is innovation happens at the coffee machine. So that is where the management meets the engineers, and they have this conversation, whereas normally they wouldn't. And I think that's really important, is that we have these moments of serendipitous moments where ideas kind of spark and happen. And definitely, the online is hard for that. Online was really hard for Think with Things also, because everybody's playing. I had them playing with objects, but they're here on their desk, and I can't see it. So we did some fun things, but I'm happy that we're back to
and the technology is only now catching up. With using our phones as cameras, or being equipped actually to share that. And I think to come back to Steve Jobs, there was even a study that those employees with either corner offices or offices close to the coffee machine or to the water cooler are the most connected ones.
I think
so. Randomly, they checked, and they did this, I think, with social graphs, social network theory. And it's because everyone just stops by there, and they have more touch points to people. So they're usually more connected. They come up with better ideas.
Yeah.
You mentioned before that, and I can totally connect to this moment where you arrive with your things to a new group. And like, uh-oh. How are they going to react?
Yeah.
So this moment of doubt where you have to be courageous. And I think every facilitator or designer
yes
can relate to that it's like having prepared a gift for someone and then they unwrap it and like, they're going to like it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So where do you think is this coming from, and how do you deal with it?
Well, I mean, definitely the people who I planned it with know a little bit about what to expect, but definitely they know they're coming to a team day. And like you said, a lot of people associate a team day, with tables and paper and pencil and bottles of water and flip charts everywhere and a big presentation on the board. I also don't really ever have a PowerPoint or any kind of presentation. So they're kind of like, they walk in and there's this long line of about 100 little black boxes with objects in there, which many times, because it's morning, they think it's snacks. So they're a bit disappointed when they go up and it's toys and objects. I breathe through it. I don't know. I mean, again, I think maybe we all have this imposter syndrome, but I guess I have done it enough now that I can just keep telling myself, they will like it. They will like it eventually, like just breathe through it, just smile and chat with them, Sometimes also, so I just did one in October in Poland with a group that are making the new European visa. It was 60 people, and they're all retired military and police officers.
Wow.
So they walk in, and I remember really in detail this one guy, really big muscles, big guy actually, and he was like, "What are we doing today?" And I was like, "We're playing." And I sort of went the opposite with him. Like I said, and he's like, "I'm not comfortable with that." And I said, "I'll give you the hardest questions then." I kind of like played with him a little bit, and he was one at the end who really came up to me and said, I had the best day ever. And I didn't think I would at all. I didn't want to do this. I didn't, but he's like, it was wonderful. And I didn't realize that everyone around me was so creative. You know, and also the director said in the beginning, you know, you're working with a group of people who are not creative at all. And that's something I just don't believe anyway. I mean, everyone is creative, everyone. So I think, I just breathe through it and continue on. And I try to, I mean, I have also had sessions where I just had one again, also in October, where I have the people who don't even come in. They sit out, you know, in the corridor on their laptops because their work is too important, you know, I guess. And I think I'm getting more and more confident to go out and say, hey, you know, you haven't yet joined a group, you know, do you want to engage, you know, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes they do. And
then it's their problem and not yours, because
absolutely,
obviously there are some issues.
Yeah. I remember the worst presentation I ever gave, actually, because I hate presenting and talking to people, is I was in a group and they were teachers, and my sister was in the audience, and she's in education as well. And I was going through my bit, you know, and this woman in front really didn't get it. And she had this, you know, negative and scowl on her face the whole time. And I was like focused on her and trying to make her get it, you know, whereas I sort of lost myself then. I lost the presentation. I lost the rest of the room because I was focused on this one woman, you know. And at the end, my sister came to me and she said, if you would have looked over here, there was a teacher who was really getting it. She was almost coming out of her seat. And she said, and next time you present to her, because it'll give you more energy and help you through it, you know, because you probably aren't going to ever get through to that one person. So
beautiful advice.
Yeah, it was really good. So I don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's some that are helpless. And then, especially if it's a presentation and not a workshop. In a workshop, if one person is not playing along, literally, it might be different. And what stood out to me when you explained the big guy in Poland coming towards you and asking, what are we doing? That you didn't try to sugarcoat it and to say, oh, it's kind of serious play, or we're thinking with our hands and we're thinking with things. No, you were blunt and said, we play.
Exactly. All day long. Yeah.
Is this your strategy to deal with these kind of people who would be more critical? What is your advice to others who might not dare?
Well, I think so. From the very beginning, I always tried to just speak to what I know. And so, like, if I was working with teachers or working with the commission or working with corporates, I'm not going to pretend like I know what you do, because I don't actually. But I do know what I do. And so for me to make it sound scientific or trainery or any of that, you know, I mean, it would also just make me feel very uncomfortable. So I'm making it very playful and about designing something and communicating in a visual way. Then that's my expertise. So I get really uncomfortable if I start talking about things I'm actually not great at, you know, or don't know that much about. So I think it's just a survival tactic. I don't know. So I have, again, there's different things I've designed. So I do have, when I'm doing a group like that, so when I did that group, I do have little signs that explain a little bit more the think with things philosophy. So that if people do want to go a little bit deeper into it, they can read those. Those are on the table with the objects. And I do talk about embodied cognition, you know, and connecting with your childhood self when we're doing the first activity, you know, and then I talk about visual thinking when we get into the bigger activity. So I think every time I do a workshop, I get better at that.
Presenting.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know if I'll be good at it, but I get better anyway. Yeah.
And isn't it funny that this is a part that you wouldn't need for children?
No, not at all, actually. I mean, because they immediately, we have these sort of words that we use in Think with Things, which is collect, connect, and communicate. So you collect your materials that you need, and then you connect them to some type of learning, whether that's, in business or in education. And then it's most important is that you get to communicate it. Capture and communicate. Capture is when you either write it down, or you take a picture, or, you've discussed it, and then you communicate it.
Mm.
And kids do that naturally. I mean, if you give them the tools, especially, you give them an iPad, they get all their materials together. They do the things that you've wanted them to do, think like a tree or whatever they're going to do. And then they capture it, with the iPad, or they draw a picture of it, and then they start talking about it. I mean, those have all come from working with children. And we sort of have to, not push, but we sort of have to flow our adult workshop in that way so that they do it naturally.
Interesting. And still, I remember that you said in the beginning that it's easier for you to wing it when you work with adults than when you work with children.
Yeah.
So what do you mean by that? What are then the moments that children would call you out?
Oh, yeah, that's a hard one, isn't it? I think it's primarily when I'm doing a theatrical one, but if I'm designing a playground with them, for instance, they'll definitely have questions that I need to be, on the ball for. And yeah, I don't know, actually, I'm having trouble thinking about exactly what that would look like. But I think you just don't want to misstep with the kids, right? Because their attention span is much less. So therefore, you have to make sure that, you're going in the right direction or something. Or I don't know. I have to think. I don't know. That's for the next podcast. I'll have to think about the question that. Question.
While listening to you, yes, the attention span. So you cannot take too much time to explain things and to make them too cognitive. So come to the point. And I can imagine, I just spent the weekend with the kids of my brother, that if you're trying to sugarcoat something, or trying to tell a white lie, or make promises that potentially you're not going to keep.
Yeah.
So whom are we designing this for? Oh, your future playground. And when can we start? When will it open? Or maybe...
No, but for sure, actually, that is one thing. So when I am doing a workshop like that, designing something for a school, or I did once a stage, a camp, where kids got to design their own room. And so I made sure in the beginning with the parents, like, if the child is going to go through this process, you have to promise, sign here on the dotted line that you will do something with his room, whatever it is that he's asked, and what is your budget? And so it's the same thing with the school, like, you're hiring me to create something that we don't know what it's going to be yet. But you're going to have to promise that you're going to make whatever they've come up with. Because they know, is this really going to happen? And you promised that this is going to happen, So for sure, actually, that's something that you have to do beforehand to make sure that, but that's the same thing, when I'm doing, sort of professional development with teachers, and it's about bettering the environment, or bettering the playground, or bettering the teachers' experience. That's something that the director also has to promise. Like, the teachers are going to go through this day, and they're going to come up with some ideas, and you need to act on them. Because if every time you have a team building, it's the same with the adult workshops. If we do the challenge solution, make sure that some of those solutions get to happen, because they've spent a whole day on this training,
And that's why workshops very often have a bad reputation. The other thing that came to my mind thinking of children and why it's more difficult, they actually remember. So if at some point at the beginning of the workshop, you explain what the agenda, what the flow is. Okay, first we're going to do this and then that, and then we close with whatever. If you're not closing that way, they will call you out.
Yes, absolutely. If you ran out of time and you said we were going to go outside and collect objects and we don't have time for it, they will say, wait a minute.
Right?
You said. So yeah, absolutely.
So you better watch out what you promise and don't make too much of an agenda beforehand.
No.
Beautiful. If someone in the audience would like to bring more play or things or tangible equivalents to sticky notes into their work, what would be your one advice?
Like I said earlier, it would be my dream that after a session, they simply bring those objects into their meeting rooms or into their own workshops because they work so easily and they're not hard to find. This was one of my worries when I first made Think with Things, was that it's really simple to duplicate, but it doesn't really feel like many people have. So I think it's, again, the combination of the things and how I facilitate it, we'll say, but definitely, and that's the same thing that I say to teachers, even when you're doing math, instead of just giving a paper and pencil, give a box of found objects and have them, the kids who think that way, have them use those.
Yeah. Yes, it is easy to replicate. And that's why you're a designer. Right? Yes, you're using them as a tool and everyone could do that. And I think that's the beauty of the facilitation world, that we're all doing the same things anyway. We're all running the same activities. And still the way we are doing them, this way we're framing them and inviting the group to participate is totally different.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think also my favorite workshops are the ones I do with other facilitators. I love doing a tag team facilitation. It's super fun because you bring both of your own ideas and techniques in and you bounce off of each other and especially if things are going over or too short, then while one's giving the presentation, the other one can be like, oh, wait, I should, throw in something here. And yeah.
Yeah, beauty of collaboration. And co-creation. Thank you, Jules.
Thank you. This has been lovely.
The extra inspiration. Is there anything that you would have wished to share, but we didn't get to?
I feel like I've shared kind of overshared, but I think it's good. I mean, I learned also about myself. That's another thing about talking, right? You learn about yourself while you're talking. So no, it's been wonderful. It's been a great experience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And we'll put all the links to how to reach you and to work with you in the show notes. Thank you for staying tuned and for listening to the show. I know how busy you are, and I appreciate that you're sharing your two most valuable resources with me and my guest, your time and your attention. If you're looking for more conversation with other facilitators and for a community of practice, why don't you join Never Done Before, the community that I have built, and many of my podcast guests are already members. Visit neverdonebefore.org, and I wish to see you there.